Hariyo, and welcome to webinar 3 as part of global series conducted by Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth, deemed to be university, to bring in global academic discourses on various realms of knowledge. I am Pramod Dinakar, Assistant Professor of Education, CVV, as our university is called, the moderator for this particular event. Today, we are having a global series talk specifically on mathematics education titled Math Without Boundaries, an interdisciplinary approach to teaching and learning. The session is handled by Sri Vinay Nair, a two-time TEDx speaker and author of two books, The Teacher Who Taught Us to Think and Journey to the Himalayas. He is the co-founder of Raising a Mathematician Foundation and also Vichar Vatika, where he is involved with teaching and curating niche programs on mathematics. He is passionate about the history of Indian mathematics and conducts programs for people of all ages on this subject. His interests include traveling, trekking, chasing cars. Yeah, it has a rider. To take the pictures, snapshots of number plates. What? Number plates? Yes, only if the number plate has an interesting number like 1729 or the Hardy Ramanujan number or 6174, the Kaprekar constant. And to top up, he didn't have a background in mathematics to start with. Interesting, isn't it? He's basically from a commerce background. Commerce, poetry, computers, travel, math, all come to this person. These seem to be an unthinkable proposition, isn't it? Yeah, we are exploring about math without boundaries from Sri Vinay Nair. Over to you, Vinay ji. The virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Pramodji, for that kind introduction. Hari Om and salutations to all of you present here. I'm very happy to be part of this global series organized by Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth, and I feel really honored. And I'm so happy to see so many participants from different age groups who have joined for the webinar. Welcome all of you, and I'll take this ahead from here. So as the title suggests, we are going to discuss something about math without boundaries. And as Pramodji said, I'm a math educator and I'm very passionate about math teaching. And I'm also a PhD scholar at Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth. Two reasons why I chose this particular topic is because one is it's an area of my research. And second is I've personally seen a lot of students benefit immensely and getting a better understanding of mathematics once they have been exposed to interdisciplinary teaching and learning of mathematics. So that is why I chose this particular topic, and I'll just give a brief outline of how I intend to do the talk today. So for about 30 minutes, I'll be quickly going through three parts. So the first part, I'll start with how we all learn different subjects and how we learn mathematics in school. In the second part, I'll try to draw some examples where math can be learned beyond the subject of mathematics in an interdisciplinary way. And in the third part, why interdisciplinary and from where we can, get to learn all these things. May I request the admin to just check somebody's cell phone seems to be ringing. So yes. All right. So these are the three parts in which I have divided the talk. And here's the first one. That is, how do we all learn different subjects in school? And when I think of this, I cannot think of a better picture than these image of buckets. And I think most of us have learned different topics as these buckets. Now, what do I mean by that? The science teacher in the class would have almost nothing to do with what is going on in the history curriculum. And the history teacher would have almost nothing to do with the mathematics curriculum. And the math teacher would have hardly anything to do with the economics curriculum. So we learn all these subjects as different buckets in silos. And even if we talk about specific subjects like math and science, for instance, even within those subjects, there are different compartments. I remember when I was in middle school, we had textbooks on mathematics in high school as algebra textbook and geometry textbook and physics, chemistry, and biology, different textbooks for them. And when I came to high school, they thought that this is not a good idea. This is something like racism within subjects. So we should not name them, label them like this. So they called it Math 1 and Maths 2, Science 1 and Science 2. But then the packaging was different, but what was there inside was more or less the same. The lessons were structured in a very compartmentalized way. Now, when it comes to math education, the problem with this kind of way of learning and teaching is we are taught certain concepts in a particular chapter, and we are taught to solve problems by using those concepts. So one can master that art. You learn these concepts, you are given a set of problems, you master that, and that's it. But then if we are given a new area altogether and we are asked, how do we apply what we have learned, these concepts, in a different area, then it becomes very challenging. And that, I think, is because of this way of compartmentalizing. Okay, so let me try to illustrate what is the problem with this compartmentalized way of teaching and learning mathematics as an example I'm taking, and whichever might be your domain, you can try to relate to that. So I've taken a problem from high school mathematics. Say that there is a problem which says prove that n multiplied by n plus 1 divided by 2 plus n plus 1 times n plus 2 divided by 2 is a perfect square. Okay, all right. Now I know that there will be in this forum we have high school math teachers and high school students or even higher secondary teachers. So when you look at this particular example, what is the first thing that comes to your mind, right? And what do I mean by that? Let me try to elaborate. Oh, I can see already raised hands from, I presume they are all students. So I really like this excitement, but I would like to take your questions towards the end, if that is okay with you. Okay. However, if the host is somebody else, you may post the answer in the chat to the host. Okay. So when we see this problem, the first thing that I think most students and teachers think about is it's a problem based on algebra. And we think of certain procedures which have been drilled into our head, right? And let me do some loud thinking that goes into our mind, whether we do it unconsciously. You see that, okay, there are two terms, and then both have the same denominator. So add the numerators, right? That is a rule that has been taught to us. And when we see brackets, we tend to open the brackets. Okay, so we get n square plus blah, blah, blah. And then we see that, oh, there are like terms, n square and n square. So you add them up. N and 3n, add them up. And then we see that, oh, when we add them, there is a 2 common in all the terms. So you take 2 outside. See a 2 in the numerator, 2 in the denominator. Cancel them out. Suddenly we remember, oh, this is a plus b the whole square. And this is nothing but n plus 1 the whole square. And feel like, hey, we have proved it, because what was the question asking us to do? The question said that you add both of them, you get a perfect square, right? Let's take a step back now. Let's try to think, what was the thinking that we did if we have solved the problem in this way? And I think there is no thinking that has happened, because we just executed a set of procedures which have been drilled into our mind without much of thinking. Okay. And let's try to see this problem from a different perspective. Let's try to ask this question. What does this thing actually mean? N into n plus 1 by 2, what does that even mean? Yeah. And I'll try to illustrate that using a different example. So let's say that we want to add all natural numbers from 1 to a particular natural number, let's say some number n, right? And maybe many of you would have heard the story of the great mathematician named Gauss, and how he solved this problem that was given to him by his math teacher when he was in primary school, to add all the natural numbers from 1 to 100. So Gauss did something like this. He wrote all the numbers in the ascending order and in the descending order below it. And then he added them vertically. 1 plus n is n plus 1. 2 plus n minus 1. So your 2 minus 1 is 1. And then there is a n. 3 plus n minus 2. So 3 minus 2 is 1. And there is n. And so on. So we see that when we add them vertically, we are adding n plus 1 plus n plus 1 plus n plus 1, blah, 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 up to a certain number of times. And what is a certain number of times? It is n number of times. right? So this is nothing but adding n plus 1 n times, but then the sequence is taken twice instead of once. So we divide it by 2. Okay. So what does n into n plus 1 by 2 mean? One way of looking at it is, it means the sum of first n natural numbers, right? And if I have to represent it pictorially, it will look something like this. This is 1 plus 2 is 3, 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, 15, and so on, right? And these numbers, these 3, 6, 10, 15, the totals of all these numbers from 1 to a particular number, they are called triangular numbers, probably because they can be represented as a triangle, right? So coming to the question, what does n into n plus 1 divided by 2 mean? It means the sum of first n natural numbers, and it gives you a triangular number, right? But we don't question, we don't ask these questions what it really means, and we just start executing a set of procedures. But can we look at the problem from a different perspective, not from an algebraic perspective, but from a geometric perspective? And this is what we can do. Let us say that I take a rectangle of side n, breadth n, let us say, and length is n plus 1. Okay. And the area is naturally n multiplied by n plus 1. So if I divide that rectangle into 2 equal parts, right? So we'll get area was n times n plus 1 divided by 2, right? So each colored part is n times n plus 1 divided by 2. Suddenly we see, oh, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and 4 squares, and here also 1, 2, 3, 4. So we see the sum of natural numbers in a pictorial way, right? So this is n into n plus 1 divided by 2. But if I increase a layer on top, you see, earlier there were n number of rows and n plus 1 number of columns. Now what I'm doing is I have n plus 1 number of rows and n plus 1 number of columns. So what do I get? I get 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, which is 10. And here when I add, I get 15. So you add 10 and 15, you get 25, which is a perfect square, right? And if you replace the number 4 or with something else, you will see that this becomes a perfect square with n plus 1 squares here, n plus 1 squares here. So the area is n plus 1 the whole square. So my question is, when we see the original question, how many of us are able to even visualize it in a geometric way if we have to solve it, right? So this is also considered as a solution, as a proof for the earlier question. Because n into n plus 1 by 2 is a triangular number, next one is the next triangular number. So when we add 2 consecutive triangular numbers, you get a perfect square, right? So the question we need to ask is, what is limiting our learning? Why do majority of us think only in an algebraic way when we are given a problem that has variables? I think that is because we are not exposed to looking at the same idea through different lenses. And this happens in school as well as college. So we don't look at an algebra problem from a geometry perspective. We don't look at a geometry problem from a trigonometry perspective, and so on. In fact, I remember, when I was in my college, I did commerce, like Pramoji said. So we had accounting, we had economics, we had mathematics. And in math, we were learning coordinate geometry. We were learning straight lines. And we were learning graphs in economics. And we were also dealing with, graphs in accounting. But this connection of looking at both of them was never shown to us. So we miss those kind of connections because these subjects are taught in silos. They are taught in independently, as if they are put in different buckets and they have no relationship with each other. Okay. So from here, I'll move on to part 2. And in this part, I'll be discussing about what exactly are we talking about as a interdisciplinary way of teaching and learning. Okay. So math and other disciplines. So what we saw as an example with that n times n plus 1 by 2, looking at it from a geometry as well as an algebraic perspective, was, breaking the boundaries that exist within mathematics. But there are boundaries between different subjects, right? Like I said initially, history teacher and science teacher and math teacher, they would have no connection, and the curriculum also would have very less to do with each other subjects. So we'll in this section, in this part, we'll look at application of math in other disciplines. But before I go and show some kind of connections, I'll request the admin to open the chat to everybody so that people can give their responses. I want all of you to name some field where you think math is applied. Okay, and you can put that in the chat. Okay, all right. So you can put that in the chat. Let me see. Okay, astronomy, physics, computers, excellent, economics, wow, music, engineering, cooking, nice, chemistry, accounting, medicine, wow, just amazing, just amazing. Psychology, astrophysics, dance, geography, painting, business, superb. Animation, coding, wow, commerce. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful response. We have a really live audience here. Admin, you can keep the chat to host only if you want to now. So these are all some areas that we all know, or at least I got to know many areas when I looked many new areas when I looked at the chat. So I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about connections between math, poetry, and music. Okay, and somebody also had mentioned about the connections between math and music, right? Now, generally when we talk about math and music, this is something that I've seen students or people who are not students of music will say, oh, okay, maybe there is a connection, but what's the big deal? I'm not going to learn music, so why do I even have to learn, or why do I how is that connection going to benefit me? Okay, so let me just try to share some examples where this connection might be more clear. Okay, so this is about long time ago, about 2300 years back in India. There lived a scholar by the name Pingala, and Pingala was the author of one of the 6 Vedangas called Chandas. Okay, so Vedangas were 6 branches of science, that the branches of knowledge that a student had to study while studying the Vedas. And Chandas in particular, it dealt with rules for writing poetry. Now, why was poetry given? So just think about it. 1 out of 6 subjects is meant for studying rules for poetry, right? So why poetry? So as you all might be aware that hundreds and thousands of years back in India, the way of learning has been oral tradition, right? So there were no books or books in print. Paper wasn't available, so teacher would say and the students would listen. They will try to by heart, and that's how they retained knowledge. All the chip was here. So how can we retain a large amount of knowledge, right? One of the best ways is to remember it in the form of a song or maybe a poetry, right? And we all remember songs very easily, right? Why? Because it has a tune, it has a rhythm. The more melodious the song is, the more it is remembered, right? So that is why poetry was a very important aspect of their lives. So Pingala, when he was writing rules for poetry, he found something very interesting, very fascinating. He said the building blocks of Sanskrit poetry, or constructing Sanskrit verses, is called syllables. And there are 2 kinds of syllables. One is laghu, which is short syllable. The other is guru, which is long syllable. Okay, so if I say my name, V na ya, right? So V na ya, all 3 are laghu or short syllables. But if you take pra mo the, right? If you take pramo, the pra takes the same amount of time as V, but mo takes more amount of time, right? So mo is a guru and the is a laghu. So we know V na ya has got 3 syllables and all 3 are laghus. Pramoda has got 3 syllables, but it is a laghu, guru, and laghu. So the question that Pingala was trying to explore is, hey, if I have to construct a line, with 3 syllables and I have two options, Laghu or Guru, how many possible combinations do I have? Okay. May I request the admin to again open the chat so that the audience can post their answers. I repeat my question. Let's say that I want to make a verse with 8 syllables. Okay, 8 syllables. And every syllable can be a Laghu or a Guru. My question is, how many possible combinations do I have if I have to construct, using Laghu and Guru? How many possible combinations do I have? I'll wait for a few seconds. There are 8 syllables, mind you, 8 syllables. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Admin, you can close the chat. So all of you gave some amazing answers. Okay. So some of you, I think, maybe did not get the question very clear, but that's all right. And my first assumption is all of you who have given the answer are primarily students, because that, it shows your excitement. So let me change the question and give you another question. Admin, once again, open the chat for me, please. So let's say that I toss 8 coins. Okay, I toss 8 coins. And there are 2 possible outcomes. I can get a head or a tail. So if I toss 8 coins, then all of them can be heads, or 3 of them heads, the rest of the 5 tails, or first 2 heads, and then 4 tails, and then heads, and so on. So how many different possible combinations will be there if I toss 8 coins? Okay, put your answers in the chat. All right. Okay, so some answers are coming to me directly, some answers are coming in the chat. All right, excellent. Yes, you can close the chat once again. All right. So if you look at these 2 questions, what is interesting is both these questions are the same question. Instead of coins, we have syllables here. Instead of heads and tails, we have Laghu and Guru here. But interestingly, when I asked the first question, there was not a single correct answer in the chat. But the moment I changed the question to something that was more familiar to you, coin toss, the right answer started coming up. So the right answer is 2 to the power 8, right? And why it is 2 to the power 8, you can learn that in the math class if you want to, but then I'll try to illustrate it through an example. So Pingala, again, he was trying to think, how can I find out how many possibilities exist and how can I list them down? So he said, all right, I have an idea. I'll start with 1 syllable. Let's say that I want to construct a verse which has got exactly 1 syllable. So it can be a Guru or it can be a Laghu. So there are 2 possibilities. But if I want to construct a verse with 2 syllables, can be both Gurus, or a Laghu followed by a Guru, or a Guru followed by a Laghu, or both Laghus. So there are 4 possibilities. Now, how do I list it down so that I don't miss out any possibility? And he gave an algorithm for that. He said, you take this Guru and Laghu, copy and paste it here. Okay. Once you copy and paste that, then below that you copy and paste one more Guru and Laghu, like this. Okay. And then here you write Guru, Guru and Laghu, Laghu. So that will be the total number of possibilities. So if this is 2, you take double of 2 here, there will be 4 possibilities. Now the question is, what if there are 3 syllables, right? What if there are 3 syllables? Take this entire thing, copy and paste it, once, paste it once again below that, copy and paste. So this is 4 plus 4, write 4 G's and 4 L's. Continue this process, right? So if you have 1 coin, 2 possibilities, 4, 8, 16, 32, it goes in powers of 2. And when we have n syllables, it will be 2 to the power n. So when Pingala was exploring this, the question that he had in front of him was 1, how do you list down everything? 2, how do you come up with a way to list down everything? Sorry, that was the same thing that I said. Sorry, 2 is, how do you find the power of 2? For example, if I have to find what is 2 power 100, right? How do I find 2 power 100? One way is I can multiply 100 2's, but that's going to be a very costly affair. It is going to eat up my time. and energy, and maybe I can go wrong in that process also. So he came up with an algorithm where you can find 2 to the power 100 in something like roughly around 10 steps, just using 10 steps. That algorithm proved to be an optimum algorithm. What do I mean by that? One of the best algorithms to use. Okay, and that algorithm was used by the Arabs even until a few centuries earlier. And Pingala did not stop there. He said, all right, because in those days they were writing on the ground, on the sand. There was a chance that whatever you have written could be just blown away by the wind, or somebody would walk on top of that. He said, let's say that I have made this listing and it has been destroyed by something. How can I find a particular row number? For example, I want to find the 5th row will have what? I know it is Guru, Guru, Laghu if I have this listing, but how do I find it otherwise? So he came up with a formula with which we can directly find the 5th row, what pattern will come here without making the listing. And he also gave a formula to find, okay, so if I have Guru, Laghu, Laghu, this will come in which row number? So these are two different problems. One is you are given a row number, you want to find the pattern. Second is you are given the pattern, you want to find the row number. And then he went on. So he kept on exploring, and he thought of all these possibilities. These are just 3 questions that Pingala explored. And today, if you ask a student of computer science, they will say that, hey, all these problems are something that I do at my undergraduate level. Of course, they don't deal with Guru and Laghu. They might be dealing with something else in the place of Guru and Laghu, but the structure of the problems are essentially the same. So if you look at the contributions by Pingala and his successors, what the successors did was they said, all right, Pingala is giving this algorithm of listing it vertically. Can I do the listing horizontally? Can I have an algorithm with which I can do this listing horizontally? And they improvised Pingala's algorithm. And some of these successors, they were also pioneers in music, in classical music. So what they did was they said, all right, if I replace this Laghu and Guru with Saregama, and I want to list down all the possible combinations of Saregama, how can I list it? They just tweaked Pingala's algorithm. Again, they had similar questions like what will be the appearance of in the 11th row, or will Ma Sarega will come in which particular row number, and so on and so forth. And all these were possible not because of magic, not because of some superpowers. It was possible because they were dealing with mathematics. And they were essentially dealing with binary mathematics. So all this listing algorithms, sorting algorithms, permutations, combinations, or what we call as the Pascal's triangles today, all these things were discovered by Indians is one thing, but the second thing is it was discovered for the sake of music and poetry, right? So these are mathematical problems today which we learn in computer science, but then what was the purpose behind this? The motivation was not computer science, because they didn't have computers at that time, but they had already started thinking in those lines. Okay, so this I think is an amazing way in my experience to introduce these beautiful topics of binary mathematics, permutations, combinations, and all with a flavor of music, poetry, and dance and percussion instruments and all that. Before I move on to the third part, I'll just quickly talk about the algebra geometry connection that exists in the Indian literature. So if you look at any of these famous texts like Brahmagupta's Brahmasputa Siddhanta or Leelavati or Ganita Sara Sangraha, Pati Ganita, if you take any of these problems, they are rich with good collection of problems. And these problems have, if the problems on geometry will have a flavor of algebra. An algebraic generalization will be backed by geometric visualization. So that was the kind of problems that they had. So students, when they were learning algebra, they knew why they were learning algebra. It was not like, okay, prove this is equal to this. That was not the objective. The objective was, how do I use this? Where do I apply this? In fact, the basic arithmetic system that we have, the decimal place value system, why did it become the superstar, and why there was no other system that replaced the decimal place value system in any civilization? because there were other number systems that existed, in the Mayan civilization, in the Babylonian civilization, in the Roman civilization. So there were different systems that existed, but this decimal place value system was, once it came, it was never replaced. Why? Because it was based on algebra. So that is the kind of power that Indian mathematics had. And here I'm showing a few problems just as sample. And all these problems, or at least most of these problems, have a strong algebra and geometry connection. So if you look at these problems, this is the famous snake peacock problem, where the snake is sitting on top of a pole. The peacock is sitting on top of a pole and the snake is approaching, and the peacock and snake, peacock glides down, snake comes here, and there is a big fight. And the snake catches the peacock catches the snake over here, and there are some numbers, some lengths given. We need to find out how far was this point from the tip of the pole, right? And this, ideally, it looks like a geometry problem, but to solve it, you need to use algebra. Similarly, there is a lotus that is getting submerged in water, and you make all these geometric constructions, but then you see that to solve it, you need algebra. Even something like this, compute the area of a cyclic quadrilateral whose sides are these. This looks like a geometry problem, but to solve this, you need algebra. So that is how all these problems were connected. So the compartment of algebra and geometry to be separate was never there. It was always together. One set of problems, you look at it from an algebraic way, from the geometry way as well. Okay, so this is how it was. Coming to the final part of my talk. So why interdisciplinary, and from where we can get to learn all these things? So interdisciplinary studies, as I think last year, almost all of you would have at least read one article or attended one talk about the national education policy that came out. And the NEP says that every higher education institution will focus and should focus on interdisciplinary teaching and learning. And why is this focus on interdisciplinary teaching and learning? What is it actually going to achieve? So let me try to give an example which everyone is familiar with. Let's take Facebook, for instance, right? To build Facebook, they needed ideas from mathematics, from computer science, and then they built Facebook. But is that all? No. There is another element of human behavior. You need to know how the users will start using that, and what do you need to do so that you can attract more and more people to start using that platform. And once you get more users, how do you make money out of it? So how do you first attract a lot of people? And for that, you need to understand how people think, their psychology, economics, and everything. And then how do you start marketing, do ad campaigns and all that? And then you do that. So you see, it's never something in silos. It's always coming with a lot of other areas. And as one of the speakers in this series earlier said, that we don't know what is the kind of jobs that will exist 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. So we cannot aim for, oh, I'm going to do this particular job throughout my life. Those days are gone, forever, at least, one generation back. So what is going to help us? These kind of skills, where we can try to understand, 2 or more different disciplines from the same perspective. Okay, so that is one. Second is, it really helps connect fields which otherwise we can never think of. How many of us would have ever thought that music and poetry can be connected to computer science? And by learning that, it is not just for students of music, right? I mean, it is equally useful for students of computer science. What is changing? They don't have to sing and dance. They just have to take examples which are from music. And in my experience, I've seen that these kind of integration actually makes the subject of mathematics less abstract for people who are not that inclined towards mathematics. So instead of telling them, you toss 4 coins, you toss 5 coins, where they'll sit and say, why on earth should I toss all these coins? Instead of that, you give them a meaningful question, and they'll feel motivated to solve that. So it really helps connect fields which otherwise seem disconnected. And as the American Association of College of Teacher Education, they have put certain set of skills that the 21st century teachers should have, and in that, interdisciplinary teaching and learning is one of the skills that they are looking at. Why? Because once you have those skills, you can build a very strong interdisciplinary curriculum. Because as you know, most of the colleges that are becoming autonomous today, or there are private universities that are coming up, they have the liberty to make their curriculum. But how do you make an interdisciplinary curriculum if you yourself are thinking in the old fashioned way, right? So for that, you need to be exposed to interdisciplinary teaching and learning. And where do we get to learn all these things? How I learned was I attended courses, workshops, referred to books, research papers, attended conference, knocked at a lot of doors, and then tried to get some things from here and there and make a bigger picture out of it, which is still available today. But if you are a, let's say, 11th or 12th grade student, and if you have multiple interests, you say that, okay, all right, I like mathematics, but that's not the only thing that I want to do in my life. I like to do something else. I would want to do a minor in finance. Maybe I would like to do something in some other discipline. And if you like these kind of ideas that I presented in mathematics, and you would want to pursue that as well, then you should look for universities where you have the faculty from all these disciplines. And that is why I chose CVV, because I wanted to do a PhD in something to do with education, math education to be specific, and history of Indian mathematics. I saw CVV, okay, there is a faculty for history and of Indian mathematics. There are faculties for education, for mathematics, for Sanskrit. I don't know how to knock 100 doors. I get all of it under one roof, right? So my advice to students who are in 11th and 12th would be to look for these kind of availability and available programs, and what gives you an extra edge, and you can come out with some amazing ways of learning once you complete your degree. Okay, moving ahead, this is the last slide, and after this I'll be open to questions. So what are the key takeaways? So one is, we saw that decompartmentalized learning really enhances deeper understanding. Otherwise, we see students who score 100 out of 100, but you change one problem, you take it from some other domain, like this Laghu and Guru thing, then they are lost. Why? Because they are trained to think only in one direction. You use this, apply this in this formula, but this way of interdisciplinary learning really enhances their thinking and learning. And we can see connections where otherwise we would never have thought of, that there exist connections. For instance, one of my students, he's right now, he's learning computer science and law, LAW. I never thought that there can be a connection between law and computer science. He said it's an emerging field. So there are many such fields that we can learn, and this kind of approach is very much required. You cannot just sit one day in a class and then build that approach. No, it happens slowly. And learning at such universities that offer courses in a multidisciplinary manner, that will really widen your horizon. It will throw a lot of things in front of you and say that, oh, math is not just here. I can see math in all these domains, right? And that does not come by doing only mathematics. Last, the most important thing is, once you do this, you will have the ability to build programs which are niche. And I'll share my example in my experience, and I'll end the talk here, and I'll be open to questions after that. So about 12 years back, when I got introduced to history of Indian mathematics, we started doing programs on history of Indian mathematics for school students. We, as in Chinmaya International Foundation. And there was nobody at that time who were offering courses on history of Indian mathematics for school students. And we started doing residential training programs where they could come and stay with us for a few days and then learn math and do a lot of, hands-on activities and things like that. And it's been 12 years. And even now, I can bet there is not a single other organization who are offering courses on history of Indian mathematics as a residential program for school students. So it's a very niche thing that that we started, and it is still running. But how can you curate such things? You need to be exposed to multidisciplines, and then you can think that, all right, this is not there, nobody's offering this, what extra can I do, right? What extra can I offer? And with this ability, if even if you don't want to start something on your own, if you want to, let's say, work in an organization, work with the government, work with let's say universities like ISER or Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth or IIT Bombay, they have all these departments related to humanities, and you can offer these kind of courses, and you will be one of the few who are offering these kind of programs. Yeah, so that is that is another takeaway. And with that, I'll take a pause to whatever I wanted to share, and I'll be open to questions. Those who have questions, you can either put it on chat to the host, or you can do a raise hand option, and I'll try to answer it in the best of my capacity. Thank you all for patient listening and being a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Vinayji, for that informating, interactive, and amazing session. I didn't know that math can be this much interesting. Yeah, you covered various areas like the compartmentalization of subjects as illustrated by your example on buckets. Yeah, it is definitely like a bucketed system where subjects are taught in different compartments, just like you mentioned the word silos. Then your talk focused on the interdisciplinary way of teaching and learning, math, poetry, computer science, music. This caters to multiple intelligences, even balancing the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Yeah, this is the magic that can be woven by an effective math teacher. We do lack such math teachers. And as you said, those math teachers with that extra edge, preparation of such teachers holds the key. Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Vinayji, for that information that you have shared within this short period of time. So let us see what questions we have. So this is time for questions. You can ask directly to me. You can send your questions to me.
Can they unmute and ask? Can they raise hand and ask questions, or chat is better?
Yes, I do have 5 or 6 questions. I will ask them.
Okay.
So let me start with one of the questions. The question is from Ajita Nair. I am a higher educator. One of the questions that I often get is, what is the benefit for me to learn math in real life?
Okay. So I think that's a very wonderful question, because it is a question that many students, especially who do not like mathematics, who would have asked this question back in school: why on earth am I learning mathematics? And one of the most common answers that is given is, you learn this, it's going to be useful in your daily life. And you see all this commercial mathematics, or you go to a shop and do this addition subtraction kind of thing. But the moment you come to high school, you feel cheated because you don't see anybody using topics from high school mathematics and using that in the real life. So what exactly is the objective of doing all these things? Is there a relevance from a real life perspective? Okay, let me share my 2 cents over here. So when we talk about the goals of mathematics education, there are 2 things. One is a set of short-term goals. The other is long-term goals. And when we talk about short-term goals, it is about learning these kind of concepts, which is going to help you in your real life. One. Second is, it also helps you learn some other higher concepts of mathematics. So you learn math for the sake of learning more math. And why you learn more math? So that you can again learn more math. Okay. So that goes in that way. But when you look at the long-term goals have a different perspective. The long-term goals of math education is to build the ability to reason, to prove things or disprove things, to build creativity, to build that ability to abstract. When you look at that n into n plus 1 by 2, how can you abstract? That's an abstracted way. But then how can you look at a let's say a 4 by 5 grid and say that, hey, this is nothing but my n into n plus 1. So building these kind of abilities are very important for overall human learning. And in my in my say, I would say that we learn maths so that we can improve our thinking. And in that process, we may use a few things in our real life and things like that. But otherwise, most of the examples would if you learn statistics, for example, you can get into domains which require analysis, right? And that is something that you might be doing in your real life. And not even that, when you if you are really grounded with mathematics, I think that whenever you get a problem, you try to attack that problem by questioning, okay, what are the things I know? How can I go to solve this problem? And you will see that these problem solving abilities, these strategies come very handy. You may not be using a plus b the whole square in your real life, but the abilities come over there. So that's what I wanted to share. I don't know if I answered the question, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a lot of questions coming up. So next, I think, yeah, right. This is a question from Subramani BY. After diploma, what are the options except engineering for a math graduate?
Okay, so after diploma, I think after diploma, they may also be able to get to do BSc course as well, right? I don't know what are the like in engineering, you get to skip 1 year and you can directly go to the second year. But I think you can definitely get into the BSc stream. But I don't know what are the routes to that. Maybe somebody and maybe Ajay ji, if he knows, he can answer that in the chat.
Yes. Now, a question from Venu Madhav Sharma. Can you suggest how Vedic maths is related to multidisciplinary fields?
Thank you so much for asking this question. This was a question I was hoping somebody will ask, because there is so much of fad and so much that goes around saying Vedic maths, and somebody says, at least 2-3 times in a week I get messages from friends or somebody on Facebook saying that what should I put my child in? Is it Abacus or Vedic math or Kumon or XYZ? So on that, here is what I want to share. So first thing is, none of these are one medicine that will cure all diseases. One. Second is, what we learn as Vedic mathematics is a bunch of techniques with which we can do arithmetic as well as algebraic calculation. But that's it. And there is more research happening on how you can do other areas. But whatever I spoke about is not Vedic mathematics. That is history of Indian mathematics. And this might sound a little confusing, because most of us might have understood that Vedic means something that is back into the Vedic times. But Vedic mathematics is a subject that developed just 100 years ago by Shankaracharya Swamiji, that dealt with arithmetic and algebraic calculations. And history of Indian mathematics that deals with all these areas. If you name it, astronomy, algebra, geometry, combinatorics, trigonometry. So all these areas are covered in history of Indian mathematics, which has a larger reach, and you can do much more and beyond arithmetic and algebraic calculations that are explained in Vedic mathematics.
We have a question from Metha Kamath. How can we get a interdisciplinary teaching and for primary and higher secondary level qualification?
For primary and higher secondary level, right? I think
I'm high school. High school is also there.
Right. And is the question only for mathematics? Because I can say for mathematics, but for other subjects, I don't know much about what are the different opportunities that are existing. So for mathematics, again, there are programs that talk about, there are workshops that happen, there are courses that happen on interdisciplinary learning and teaching. So one of the courses that I really got benefited was a course that focused on something on transdisciplinary approach. So that was done by an organization called Think, THINQ. And if you look it up on the internet, you will find their courses. So that is something that I can suggest. If you're looking only at mathematics and other areas, then I'm sure CVV would be offering a lot of programs in the coming years, where math and other disciplines can be integrated, and we can do that. So so that is something that I can share. But like I said, there are not many organizations who are offering these niche programs, so we'll have to hunt it well if you're looking for a teacher training program. Yeah.
And we do have a BSc B.Ed in CVV. If you are interested, you can just go through the curriculum for that and even the details, curricular details that is in our website. Yeah.
Right.
So we have a lot of questions from Amrita Ravi. I will take one or two.
Okay.
Maybe I may not be able to take all. Yeah. You mentioned about triangular numbers. One is also included in it, isn't it? Right.
Yes.
Can you please give an explanation for this?
We can say just by definition. That's all. So there is an option in math. We can say that, okay, so like something like y0 factorial is 1, right? That by definition. I understand the question why there is no because there is no triangle that is formed. In fact, you can also, okay, so let me give another example for that. So let's say that you imagine, I don't have a writing tool, so I'll force you to do this imagination. Let's say that you have a triangle, okay, and you draw let's say a median from one of the vertex 8, the opposite side. Now if you count the number of triangles, you have two new triangles and the original triangle. So 1 plus 2, 3. So that's a triangular number. If you draw two lines, you will get 1, 2, 3, and then you can combine two triangles. So you will get two more and one more. So you will get 6 triangles. So if you keep on drawing those lines, you will get, then if you count the number of triangles, you will get a triangular number. But if you draw a triangle with no median, 0 lines, you have one triangle. So that is 1. So that is also another way in which we can look at that, why that 1 is a triangular number. There is also one question, I think, from a student, if I may just quickly take, Pramodji, it has come to me. Yeah. So I don't understand, why do we have to learn the topic of congruency, right? So congruence, or, most of these topics in geometry or high school algebra deals with proofs. And the objective is, when we are doing all those things, we are getting into a very systematic way of arguing out things, putting our ideas and thoughts in a very logical process. That is the ideal goal. Okay, it's a different thing whether that is happening or that is not happening in every classroom, but that is the kind of goal that we have. When we do these kind of proofs, we are trying to develop a step-by-step thinking process. Okay. Yes.
Yes, now we have a question from Vasudevan Rajagopalan. I am a retired applied nuclear scientist with multi-field academics. However, I feel each field by itself is vast and has integration of fields is more of a skill that can be taught. How your view that practicality of teaching diverse fields together and making it feasible for employment? Is it feasible?
Yes. So again, I think that's a very interesting question. So by interdisciplinary teaching and learning, I don't mean that everything has to be taught in that particular way. There would be things which we have to deal with, only. For example, if you want to teach about negative integers, right? You may not find examples from other. You may not. I mean, one may be able to find. So it's fine to teach certain things in that particular discipline as well, and we can go for interdisciplinary areas. The question that comes on employability. So the other day I was listening to a talk where the speaker was a researcher in human computer interface, or HCI, or HEI, something like that. So what they do is they are trying to build what do you call that, instruments with which they can do different kinds of testing, or surgical instruments and things like that. And they are trying to see how humans respond to those kind of things. So when they are doing something like that, they need people from a medical background. They need people from all these background, and they need people who can understand each other. Because if a math person is talking purely in math and they cannot talk in the language of medicine or in the language of psychology, then it's of not much use. So that is where we are saying that if we have these kind of skills for the kind of jobs that are dynamically changing, then these skills are very useful for those kind of jobs. So we can only go ahead with the kind of skills that we have, and try to adapt to different kinds of jobs. So yeah.
Abhijit asks, when we discuss about mathematics in daily life, we use addition and subtraction only. But how come mathematics is applied in a different or in other fields of life, other aspects of life?
Right. So, as Abhijit, as I mentioned earlier, I also felt cheated when my teachers told me that, you learn math so that you can use it in your daily life. Or the, second answer would be you learn it in future, it will be of use to you and so on. So, of course, it is useful for me because I'm a math teacher now. But then for a common man, how does it really help? So, I think what math helps us is not by the topics. We may not be calculating LCM or exponents and powers, or calculating roots or square roots and cube roots. We may not be doing that, but we are constantly thinking. We are constantly in the mode of inquiry, using logic and reasoning every day. And the people who are good in mathematics, they have good skills of thinking logically, and they cannot be easily cheated. So I think for me, the biggest advantage of learning mathematics that I've seen is logic and solving real life problems, because you put that logical thinking over there, and then you will be able to solve real life, not using formulae. Okay. So yeah. There was a question that came to me. Can I just quickly take one?
Sure, sir, sure.
There are many questions. I'm sorry, I'm missing out a lot of questions, but this one is there a course or a book to know how to do interdisciplinary with music and poetry and in computer science? This question is by Nirmala ji. So Nirmala ji, there are research papers available on music, poetry, and computer science, and you can look up for Pingala's Chandas, and if you look at these keywords along with Indian mathematics, you will be able to find research papers by scholars like M.D. Srinivas, K. Ramasubramanian, and Sridhar, and so on. In fact, if somebody is looking for books related to Indian mathematics, if you want to just study from a high school perspective, then there are excellent books published by Chinmaya International Foundation, and I'll just put the link in the chat. Just one second. So if you go to this website, you can look up for books on Brahmagupta's mathematics, Sridhara's Patiganita, and then there is Leelavati, and there is one more book, I think. Okay, so yeah. So that's yes.
Yes, Vinayji. Now we have a question from the Podbean podcast. Vinayji, Pingala also has relevance in filling out binary expansion. Seem to have potential applications in computing or parallel computing. Can you give any specific reference? We are going live on Podbean, YouTube, and Zoom, so we are taking questions from there.
Sure. So a specific reference for what? I didn't get specific reference for what?
For Pingala's system of binary expansion.
Okay. So how Pingala did it?
Yeah.
Is okay. So you'll find a wonderful video on YouTube by NPTEL. Let me just put it here by NPTEL, and you can look up for Chandas and Pingala. If you use this and to Google, you will find this video where they are explaining how Pingala was using. So Pingala was not using 0 and 1, but he was essentially using the binary way of representing. In fact, the chart that I showed, the listing of gurus and laghus, if you replace all the guru with 0 and all the laghu with 1, okay, and you take the mirror image, it will give you the binary listing in the sequential order. So when we look at all the algorithms and how it works, given by Pingala, one will be really convinced that there was a very good understanding of binary mathematics in used by Pingala. In fact, yes, Srinath, thank you so much for sharing that. So there is something called as OLA sessions, OLA for IKS. You will find those sessions in the YouTube channel of Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth. There were 2 sessions specifically on Chandas done by sorry, I'm not getting the gentleman's name. He's a great scholar. So you can look up for those videos as well if you want to learn more on Chandas. Yeah.
So we have a question from Anuradha. Can we do PhD in mathematics after an MSc with an interdisciplinary approach? Is it possible?
Oh yes, if I can apply and get through for a PhD program in math education without having a background in education as well as mathematics, I think doing it after MSc, getting into a PhD program should not be hard at all in an interdisciplinary way. It's just that you need to look for places where you will get that kind of opportunity, where you have people from different disciplines, under whom you can really work with. Yeah.
Now I'll take one more question. Sahasya, she has asked, how conducive is our nation with regard to interdisciplinary learning in terms of investment and employment?
In terms of investment, I didn't get that part. Maybe she can just, reply on that. In terms of employment, like I said, now let's say that we are thinking of a government job, let us say, because many of them aspire for government job. In the government, there is a separate cell for Indian knowledge traditions, which is set up in Delhi. I know this because I know certain people who are working over there. So there they need people who are from this kind of background who can do that. So like this, in whichever discipline you are looking at, once you get into that, you will find that there are always opportunities where they hire people from these kind of interdisciplinary thing. And the examples also that I gave for Facebook or like this human computer interaction, so the interface. So in all these places, they are looking for people who have skills in multiple domains. So I'm sure you will be able to find more, or you can you can definitely start off something on your own, and you will be offering something that will not be available in most places. So that is also something that you can try looking at. Yeah.
Yes, I think we have exceeded the time, maybe by 5 or 6 minutes. So thank you, Vinay ji, for that wonderful presentation and, of course, the answering of the queries. We have a lot of queries, and I would request the participants to send your queries, if any, to the email that I've just posted on the chat box. So you can send your queries, and we will share it to Vinay ji, and he will answer it and send it back to you. So thank you for participants for raising so much of questions, and we have some 30 odd questions. We are copying it, and we'll be sharing it to Vinay ji, and he will be answering it and sending them back. So once again, on behalf of Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth, I wholeheartedly thank Sri Vinay Nair for his exemplary, simple, informative, and effective presentation, as well as excellent clarification and answering of the queries. And I also thank the participants who have joined in large numbers and are part of this interactive process and who have made this question answer session a great success. And hope all of you got something new from this particular session and had a lot of takeaways for your future also. Thank you for joining in. Hari Om.